Good afternoon, even though it's morning. Good evening. Anyway, I am privileged. This is Professor Amina Al-Din with Critical Talk, and I am so privileged to be here with Marguerite Aziza Hill, who is a co-founder and executive director of MuslimARC. This is a wonderful young lady. I'm so excited. I don't know what to do with myself. She's an adjunct professor, a blogger, an editor, and a freelance writer. And I will tell you more about where her writings are and a little bit about the Muslim Art website. But she has been Muslim for more than a decade, maybe more. I have to count anyway. But her experiences as a Black American woman inform both her research and Muslim art to a great deal. Because I've been reading all of the blogs and the posts. She has a bachelor's degree in history from Santa Clara University and a master's in history of Middle East and Islamic Africa from Stanford. Her research includes colonial perceptions, mixed race identities in northern Nigeria. Oh, that's exciting. Anti colonial resistance among West Africans in Sudan in the early 20th century, transformations in Islamic learning in northern Nigeria, and international student programs at Al Azhar and Cairo University. She gives talks and lectures, and hopefully, we will have her very shortly in Chicago after I get through twisting her arm. Um, I want to talk uh, today about a lot of things. Happy Juneteenth.
Happy Juneteenth to you too, Dr. Amina Dean. Thank
Yes,
you.
you're more than welcome. And I want to first, if I could get my producer to cue up the video you have on the website so we can get a little bit of a setting.
What world do we want our children to grow and play in? Do we want them to grow in one where they have to be aware of the racial inequities that surround us today? We as a collective are responsible for addressing these issues that will dictate their upbringing. MuslimARC is here to facilitate that discussion in the most effective way. In 2014, during Black History Month, Muslim Anti-Racism Collaborative, known as MuslimARC, officially launched with the hashtag being Black and Muslim, that trended globally in 7.5 hours and garnered international media attention. Inspired by Islam's egalitarian message, MuslimARC's leadership team utilized digital media to connect educators, scholars, and community leaders to uproot racism. In Southern California, MuslimARC focuses on research, curriculum development, and community partnership. MuslimARC currently organizes regular on-the-ground programming in Metro Detroit and Greater Los Angeles. 2017 has been a groundbreaking year as MuslimARC transitioned from an all-volunteer organization to hiring its first 2 full-time staff members. MuslimARC also acquired a property as part of the Dream of Detroit Development Project, beginning the process of transitioning from a virtual organization to a brick-and-mortar institution. The Muslim Anti-Racism Collaborative House, ARC House, will serve as an anti-racism office and training space in Detroit. Our new home is located in Detroit, Michigan. In the neighborhood surrounding the Muslim Center, a mosque and community center in Detroit that identifies with the leadership of Imam W. Dean Muhammad and aims to work for the betterment of the whole society which we all share. American Muslims are one of the most diverse faith groups in the United States. By successfully educating about racial inequities within the community, we can demonstrate a model for American society at a time when there is an even greater need for the work. For us, for our children, for our future. Please donate generously today for MuslimARC's mission to create a more racially just American community.
Even though that video was created a minute ago, it is so relevant today. Uh, Given everything that's happening, I've been up watching the Juneteenth celebrations across the country, and that video just fits so perfectly. But I want you to begin to talk a little bit about what Muslim art. What are the services?
Yeah, well, we have a number of services that we provide, and that align with that mission, our mission statement of providing education, anti-racism training, and education resources. So many of the resources that we try to provide free online and are on our website, and that includes some of the research that we've done on intra-ethnic Muslim relations, and that came out of our needs assessment study. We have like our reading list, book lists. We try to create regular programming. So through COVID, we partnered with Muslim Wellness Foundation, which to create education campaigns around COVID to support Black Muslims, but also to raise awareness around racial inequities and the health crisis. And so that include, weekly webinars, especially during the early stages of the pandemic, and online resources too. And so I would say, like, on our website, we provide those resources, creating online panels like the one that we did this last Wednesday, and you can see that on Facebook Live. So we had the Proclamation 2020, which was like a large scale teach-in around issues around abolition, the organizing work and rooting that in history. The week before, we had a webinar basically outlining what our trainings look like and our online membership. So those two services that we provide with our trainings, we have 5 tracks of our curriculum that we've developed over the past 6 years. The first track is our community education track, and we call it our race identity series. The second one was developed, and that is more geared towards nonprofit work, or people that are working in nonprofit world who want to incorporate cultural competency and anti-racism. We also have critical anti-Islamophobia track, our narrative change work. So last night we had a live, not Facebook Live, but Instagram Live. I'm still learning the platforms, and I'm starting to show my age. I'm the Facebook age, but now the young folks are on Twitter, and with the Instagram Live, we talked about a writer's room that we organized, and in that writer's room, we had, we trained screenwriters on anti-racism, and we created a partnership with consultants as part of that work. And our other track that we haven't, it's not publicly on our website, but it's a track that aims to educate, to focus with educators from K through 12, but also college. And so those courses, the online trainings that we provide along those tracks, that's like the core part of our mission. Another service that we provide is our membership. And that's really trying to bring together anti-racist leaders, community change makers, people who are interested in anti-racism. And so, this past month, I know our membership doubled. We were at about 160 members before the George Floyd protest, but I know we have at least 100 more and 30 new volunteers. So we're maintaining that network through Slack channels, through how we communicate, texting, and all to support all the work that people are doing across the country.
Well, believe it or not, one of my grandkids had me watch a Instagram stream last night that you all have done with two women. Uh, I was, I don't know if you've seen it even, but I was charged. First of all, I don't use Instagram, but it was great. But let me go back. You covered so many areas that are in my interest, but I think we need to really talk about many African American Muslims find that one, according to Muhammad uh, Fraser Rahim, that African American Muslims are being, there's an attempt by immigrant Muslims to erase the African American Muslim story or to relegate it so far in the background that it becomes an historical footnote.
Mm-hmm.
One thing. On the other hand, we have a persistent Islamophobia. And Namira wrote, and you can tell us who Namira is, but I read a little bit of it on soft Islamophobia. And so there's almost like a competition between, am I going to pay attention to what's happening to African Americans? Subset of that is African American Muslims. Or am I going to be on the side where I don't pay attention to that and I pay attention to Islamophobia?
Yeah, it's I know that within the Muslim community, and this is something that we had worked to agitate around, since we launched Being Black and Muslim was one, even before we had started the organization, one of the things that we wanted to address was the erasure of Black Muslim narratives. And we could see that in very tangible ways. For example, when there would be like an Eid coverage, right? Like if you have like BuzzFeed or mainstream press is like they would cover, the Eid celebrations, and we would notice that there wouldn't be any coverage of Black Muslims. If it was global, there were no pictures. You would never see Senegal. You would never see Northern Nigeria. You would never, I mean, maybe they would show one Indonesian, and given that 15% of the global Muslim population is in sub-Saharan Africa, like
Right,
that didn't make any sense because only 18% is in the Arab world,
right,
but yet they were heavily represented. Similarly, the within American Muslim communities. So you would have within mainstream press, if they were showing aid or, highlighting something, like a hashtag conversation. And what we found was even if we looked at the numbers of some of the most popular tweets or social media posts, those wouldn't be covered in the, in the reportage. And so we saw that erasure was very tangible. It didn't make sense with the demographics or the numbers, and that it really had to do with the dominant narrative of making Islam, especially with American Islam, like to be perceived as like a brown foreign religion, as opposed to a faith that is practiced by Americans who have been here for centuries and have embraced Islam,
mm,
and also our experience as Muslims is really a rejection of white supremacy. Like as a convert myself, and I think that part of that pushing that narrative back. When in the 90s, many Black Muslims were actually much more prominent in political discourse or
right.
representing American Islam, but in trying like white aspirationalism, how would you want to show like an Islam that says, no, we don't need to assimilate. We don't need to become, I'm not like you, like I'm different, I'm unique. Especially if the message that you're trying to portray is like, I'm I'm just like you. I live in your suburban neighborhoods. I'm assimilated. When you have many Black Muslims that have critiques of that process, many of them are choosing not to assimilate, whether they live in predominantly Black communities, and they're contributing in their communities and they're assimilated, like they're well integrated in American society. But, so those were the kind of competing narratives. And then when you have some people in their work, they see a zero-sum game, like if they see, like, how could we if we lift up these narratives, we'll be erased. Well, no, you won't be erased. You could have multiple narratives, but if the single story that people want to tell about American Islam is the kind of identity struggle as an immigrant, that's one story, but there's many other stories, right? And so that danger of a single story, that's what we're dealing with the impact of that. And what we found is that by showing the plurality of experience, and even for the Black Muslim experience, like we have, from the beginning, we've always had Afro-Caribbean folks who are part of the American Muslim story. And then now, like we've always, since slavery times, we had Black Muslims from, formerly enslaved Muslims who actually went back to Africa. And then now we have West African Muslims, East African, South African Muslims here. And so when we kind of talk about Black identities, that's also very diverse. And I think that that's sometimes getting to that nuance. It's not, like people may want to have that simple story, especially in mainstream media, right? Like
absolutely.
Yeah. But then what's the weird contrast is that they celebrate the heroes. Then, then it's the Muhammad Ali's and the Malcolm X, it's the it's Hakeem Olajuwon, Ibtihaj Muhammad. So, and our stars. And so when it comes to like celebrities and when I ask audiences, like, close your eyes, who's the first person that comes to mind when you think about who's an American Muslim? A lot of times they'll either say one of the people that I just mentioned,
right,
or they'll say like their neighbor, and they'll mention maybe a South Asian or Arab, like Arab person but it's like, but a regular, person like me, like they won't, they can't, they're like, it's, so there's a little bit of cognitive dissonance as far as like how they think about like who's the ideal Muslim type.
Yeah, I think that there's so much embedded in what you just said. So we have these competing narratives. I was speaking with several women yesterday, and one of the things that happened was the conversation around jumping on the bandwagon. And how do we deal with immigrant Muslims who the racism in the immigrant community is deep? How do we deal with them wanting to jump on a bandwagon? And what are they going to do if the bandwagon leaves without them?
That is such a good question. And it is very, it is a concern, right? Like that there are sometimes these waves of interest, right? And, and the discussion around racial disparities really began during COVID, and, but the actual interest in, racial justice, right? And the language that many people have been talking about, whether, defunding the police, addressing the criminalization of Black communities. This is all very new. And so, really, I think this is really about accountability. You can't be an anti-racist without accountability to those who are impacted, and that it's a lifetime commitment. And so we know that, for many people, they may have a, in race identity theory, like they actually talk about, a pseudo psychological racial, like anti-racist identity, especially for like white anti-race or people that are allies, you know, like so. So I think that extends to like even when you're talking about addressing anti-blackness, that you know you have different stages, and you know like there's you know like one when people they first accept all the racial norms, and then when there's that dissonance, sometimes they go back to blaming the you know the community. So there was a lot of blaming Black people for our conditions, right? And then there's the moving to the you know the learning, and then you get that pseudo psychological anti-racist identity, which has the need to have Black people affirm you're a good person, you know, like we have to give them a bunch of cookies, and you know like there's all this guilt and a need to you know like I mean
but
I hate
it's always transitory.
yeah
You know,
yeah
if people are not marching in the street, then I can go back to being whoever it is that I was, and I don't have to pay any attention to African American Muslims or Latinos or anybody in particular. I can just have my Muslim ethnic identity. But I want to go back to what I know that you do, and that is the intra conversation between African Americans and Africans. Here in Chicago, African imams did not see initially the protest as a problem for them. What's going on there?
yeah well you know I mean part of it is many you know with that experience of you know the immigrant experience and how they are conditioned to accept the kind of norms and narratives as part of their process of becoming American and belonging, and that can include don't make waves. Many of the imams, you know, and you think about the age group, like they're you know like they're what generation that they're coming in, or and then their children who come here will experience very violent forms of like of state,
Exactly.
you know, and even like there is a mosque to prison to deportation pipeline where many young Africans get deported because they're over, you know, and there's an article, I think it's like Sister Shamima Ibrahim. If I'm butchering your name, my apologies. I'm really bad at names and dates, and I'm a historian by training. But we can, you know, I will share out that article. But she writes about the ways that with racial profiling, that African immigrants, they're actually subjected to much more likely to get deported because they're stopped by, and even if they didn't do the crime, like they're forced to plead guilty, and then once they're you know guilty and they're released, they're sent back. So this impacts them in profound ways, and it also can have them cause certain fears about their children and even their own selves, because you know like you'll have now, you know, for the protesters, the FBI coming and following them
everywhere.
Like so there's a lot of internal fear around that, but it's also coupled with this thing, you know, certain ideas of, hey, I came to this country with nothing. Why can't African Americans get it together? You know, like
but nobody comes to this country with nothing.
Yes.
You had to get here.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, there had to be some money somewhere. If for nothing, I forget the name they call those go-between people that spur you on your way, but you had to have something.
So, there's a network, there's all sorts of things. The process is complicated, even for those who are coming up. I mean, I've talked with refugees, like people who have come from South America, made their way all the way up to the border. And it's, you know, it's not a fun experience by any means. But, you know, part of that experience, and then when you have, you know, there's this idea of like the guest covenant, you know, like, and that they're actually, you know, like when you go to somebody's house and your host may not treat you so nice, but you're in their house, right? And so that's kind of how they'll be. It's like, well, we had it bad there, but we're in this, you know, these people's house, so we're going to be as polite as possible and not say. And I've seen that, you know, like that pushback from those who are, that they have that guest covenant. Is like, how dare you come here and complain about you being mistreated or oppressed, which is unfair. If I'm a host, I should, a host of something that I stole, so, and this is like when you think about what America is, like, stolen land, like I'm now hosting on something that I did not build. It was built by slave labor on land that I stole, but I'm going to make anybody else who comes here, and I'm going to force them to all sorts of just accept any way that they're treated. And that's it. And so, they, for a number of reasons, from their own trauma of being colonized and being in like very difficult states, colonized by the West also, and then neocolonialism by many ways, America, unless you're a Francophone country. So all of this, we're talking about, at least in Africa, like over 100 years of colonial experience. And they come here and it's like systemic racism and dominant narratives. And, and they're trying to navigate their proximity to Blackness and saying like, well, we're not like them. It's just like, we're the good ones. And,
not realizing that it's skin color here.
Yeah.
And no good. You're just Black.
Yeah. And they're trying to navigate white supremacy and don't have the analysis or the strategies of thinking about like building solidarity, and maybe they don't understand how their lives would be much more improved with a society that has gone through abolition, right? So I think, in many ways we have to think about, how do we educate our imams? How do we educate our, like our elders? How do we connect them to our elders who were in the Black Panther movement, who were being brutalized by police back then, and then so I do think we need the intergenerational work and intercommunal discussions that are just beginning to happen. They're difficult to have, but they're starting to happen.
But I from reading the website, you all have figured out how to navigate those conversations and how to mediate them, which is why I'm so happy today to be talking to you, because they are sensitive, and the sensitivities are right on top of the skin, although the pain is very deep. And so people find it very, very difficult to talk with one another. And I'm just seeing it all over the place. Let me see. We went from pandemic and all the anxiety and psychic trauma around, oh my God, I got to stay in my house. I don't know if I like my house that much to stay in. Oh my God, these kids. The beauty of my children was that they left every day, going to school or somewhere out of here. Now I'm stuck with them. I got a spouse who I like, but we have our space every day. So I can really decide if I like him, and it's not so bad. But now I have all these people in the house. The kids have made a second home in the refrigerator. We're running out of food, all the time. Then we looked up and it was Ramadan. And I watched the feeds, and immigrant imams talked about, well, what does the law say? And in this instance, about closing the masjid or not, the state took precedent. If your state said close, it didn't matter what Islamic law said. You see? Because everything had to close. I'm sure Christian communities and Jewish communities experience the same kind of spiritual angst, because so much of who we are spiritually is tied to traditions beyond the core of the faith. Get me?
Yeah.
So African American Muslims, the one I was trying to tune into everybody, immediately went into another gear. It wasn't about what the law said. It was, okay, we can't do this way, we'll do this way. Here in Chicago, Imam Tariq El-Need immediately virtual khutbahs. Uh, there were women and men who stepped in to do webinars, this, that, and the other. The immigrant community had much more difficulty. And I made a mental note of that. But then states or cities, well, really cities, began to ease the restrictions after about 2.5 months or so. People stuck their feet out the door, and the next thing I see is a white officer posing for a picture with his knee on this black man's throat.
Mm.
And it was like, oh, okay, this is a wondrous time. Tragedy begets lots of stuff, right? I was so angry. I think I grew younger. If there's a way to do that, because my energy level went up. Uh, and then we were in protest. So if you look at that timeline of the need for a Muslim arc became critical. Uh, because people didn't know how to talk about anything. I watched Dave Chappelle's 846. And did you watch that?
I haven't had a chance to watch it
Oh,
yet.
girl, hold your heart when you watch it. Because what happened, it was like a hammer hit his heart.
Mm.
Okay. We didn't know how to talk to each other, and which is why we need to get a MuslimARC here. I sit on the executive board at Iman, and Rami and Shamar and everybody went into high gear immediately to facilitate virtual discussions. But people needed more.
Mm-hmm.
They needed to be able to get out the angst and then have it temper, and to get out some more angst and have it temper, and then have a way to see their way toward some solution so they could talk some more. Talk to me.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just really listening and having, thinking about that process, and I was just really like absorbing and just thinking about how we had those conversations in the Black Muslim Coalition, and holding space,
Talk
like
about the Black Muslim Coalition.
yeah. So we found, when COVID, when we had to go into social isolation, and what we found, when the National Muslim Task Force, they had reached out to the national organizations, and on the list, we had the Muslim Alliance of North America. They reached out to MuslimARC, and we're, like I'm the executive director, so we're Black-led Muslim Wellness Foundation, Similar Worthy, Mosque Cares, and but during the first meeting, we found that in other kind of also other stakeholder meetings, we found that Camilla and I from Muslim Wellness Foundation were some of the only active Black members there, and we didn't see Black Muslims at the table. And this has been for many years, since 2016, 2015, when it comes to major decision makings on policy and on strategy and how we're responding to crises. I've been in rooms, whether that's in DC or in Chicago, where they're all
Isn't
like,
it great?
50 groups, and like I would come in, and I was, and through the planning, it was like, yeah, we want to center Black, we want to be representative, we want to be diverse, but I would be in a room of 50 and the only Black Muslim.
Right.
And and that contrasted, right, when you think about the statistics around white Muslims, maybe 1% to 6% at most, and there would be like 10
exactly
white, so I was like, okay, so there's an overrepresentation and an underrepresentation of 25 to a third, like a third of mosque going Muslims are Black. We tend to go to mosque more, so we're going to be a little bit overrepresented there. But according to studies, right, like you have 25% of Muslims. So 1 out of 4 people in that space should be Black because
Right.
we're impacted, but we're not, asked for our opinions. And then I would come in like, Margaret, what's the Black opinion? And I'm just like, I am one person and I don't represent all Black Muslims, and there should be more people in the room. And then the next time I would get uninvited. So,
Exactly.
that was, so because I wouldn't even say it rudely. Like, I mean, there's times I am loud, like when I've just had enough, when I'm not heard and I keep saying it, then I like my 3rd, 4th time, I'm going to raise my voice. But I was like, look, we are a resource to help you with diversity, equity, and inclusion. Use us as a resource. We're not turned to as a resource until, and there's a direct contrast now, like we're asked as a resource, but it's like under such huge demand that we're and it's during a time when we're in transition as an organization. So we're like, give us a moment to kind of like, we're bringing in a new board and our new trainers, and we understand it's a crisis, but Black folks have been in crisis, right? This is the 100th anniversary of the Tulsa race riots, so it's like, and our families have been impacted by police brutality, and we've been raising, we've been trying to ask for folks to be involved in Black Lives Matter since it started, right? Since Eric Garner's death and we didn't have this mass mobilization, but I think now is a different moment where so many people are out in the street because they're seeing the direct impact of white supremacy, like in the amount and systemic racism was made so tangible.
Let me ask you, let me stop you right there. Your president said there is no systemic racism. Many immigrants say there is no systemic racism. I'm here. I bought a house on the hill. I got a car. My kids go to private schools, etc. There is nothing systemic about racism.
Well, I mean, the cognitive dissonance, if you have some people that deny racism, but then they could say that Islamophobia or anti-Muslim bigotry is real. So that's deep cognitive dissonance. And we know that anti-Muslim, like when you think about what is white supremacy, and the major logics of it are settler colonialism, anti-Black racism, from slavery, and militarism, this war, constant war against, and what we're seeing is the war on terror. So they can say, talk about that. Like they could talk about foreign policy and the impact of underdevelopment, like the policies there. But if they want to say just because they benefited from a system, because they came on certain types of visas that allowed them to still be like a professional class, or even if they're kind of a middleman class, like, so when people say something, that doesn't mean that's an informed opinion or statement. It has no basis in sociology, in psychology, and history, nothing in cultural studies, because, you have doctors, you have the studies that show that regardless of wealth, that maternal rates, death rates are higher. And recently, like I was even malpractice, like one of the things, like, and it hadn't really dawned on me until recently. It was the other day where I thought about, like, I had a sister that passed at 8 years old, and it was medical malpractice. And, and I hadn't made the connection until this week to think about, why did they do the certain thing? Like they put her in traction when she had a crushed hip. And just like, how did they see this little Black girl's pain, put her in traction? So then by the time they were like, oh, let's fix this. And then they fixed her leg, and she expired on the operating table because her lung was punctured. Did they not ask her, where did she hurt? This little 8-year-old girl. My daughter's 8 years old. And in that suit in 1979, they paid my family $1,000 for every year of her precious life. And so that within itself that's racism. Like she was worth so much more, but her treatment was, they made really bad decisions. And we see that they don't give Black children the same amount of painkillers. They don't perceive, so
Or
what,
Black adults, right?
yeah, Black adults even. And so, you could have Black children in serious pain, and they're just like, like how they perceive our pain, right? It's sort of, it's accepted in that bias. And the medical field understands that. It's in housing that, if you put a Black family in front of the same house to sell it, people will likely, and this is what, like, this actually, like, people will likely lower the property rates if you advertise it with a Black family. There's studies that have shown that. And that plays a part in the segregation that you see in cities like Chicago, where certain people, communities of color, right? Like they're embracing their people of color identity, but they follow patterns of white flight and don't move into Black neighborhoods because it's perceived danger, when they're much more likely to be unwelcomed and experience danger and violence by being in white neighborhoods. But those are perceived as safe. So it's the bias in housing that shapes segregation, where Muslims of different races, like, they're not living with Black Muslims because they see Black and Latino neighborhoods as unsafe, right? And
But they don't even see that, especially immigrant American Muslims, that their communities largely are constructed communities. They're not old white communities. They're relatively newly constructed communities, which might lay on borders with working class white communities. And after 9/11 here in Chicago, they saw some of the angst that can come with any new construction, but you have a middle income immigrant community living next to a working and poor white community who lives in trailer homes. So how the topography of America's racism, the concrete box that it puts, especially Black, but also brown bodies in, where you try to get decent health care, there's a wall. You try to live decently, there's a wall. You try to even eat well, there's a wall. And then, I mean, everywhere you turn, there's a wall, which makes it education. It makes it systemic. So it's that's been one of the hardest things to explain here. And I would like to say to the viewers, please go on MuslimARC's website. There are some wonderful articles there. Um, Hopefully, we can get a MuslimARC branch here in Chicago, but at least while that's being worked on, to bring some of the workshops here to Chicago. Uh, I wish I had brought you all to DePaul, but I can always encourage somebody to bring you to DePaul, even though I'm retired. It's very, very important. I think one of the things that spurred the immigrant community was, oh my God, in these protests, they're white people. And there have always been white people in the struggle, forever. Some have given their lives, the whole 9 yards. So I think that was a shock. I was surprised that in several venues, African American Muslims were never called on, like you talked about being at a table. I've been watching the news, and my colleagues who are professors of African American history abound. No Muslims. You know, uh, Speakers from the Muslim community have been all but absent.
Yeah.
Not had a real leg to stand on to push themselves forth. I mean, we have these social organizations that, as I don't know that we have, but there are ICNA, ISNA, ISPU, whatever, um, which deal primarily with immigrant Muslim lives and African American Muslim lives as an afterthought, but they even were not there. CARE in its newsletter had uh, stances, and it was broadcasting incidents that were happening. Uh, what do we do? Because in those communities, there are those with a sincerity of faith who know they must stand for justice.
Mm-hmm.
What do we do until we can get you out here?
Well, we do have like, well, we'll be there virtually for sure. We're definitely in talks. Like, I mean, within bringing trainings to Chicago institutions. We do have some Chicago members, Bill Chambers, Safaya Fauzi. Like, so we really need to utilize those training opportunities as a way to build our leadership, like add Chicago members to our leadership team, and to give them those tools to do that work on the ground in Chicago, and work on the partnership. Like we're also we're partnering with Inner City Muslim Action Network on
Yay!
curriculum. Yeah, we love them, and given that George Floyd's murder was in front of a Muslim-owned store, right? And so and thinking about the work that Iman does and the Corner Store Witness of rethinking our corner stores, rethinking our markets. Like what is the role of Muslims as drivers of racial equity in our locations, so that's something that's very important. And so seeing that work in Iman, like in Chicago happening, and that and now it's, we're seeing like they have like seed organizations like Dream of Detroit is inspired by that, or Sahaba Initiative in San Bernardino County where I live is inspired by that. And we have Iman in Atlanta. And so there's other organizations that are drawn from that model, like building on that model. So what we have to do also, for within Black spaces, right, there's the erasure of Muslimness, right? They even removed the Muslimness from Malcolm X.
Tell me about it. Tell me about it.
It's so we have to really address the Orientalism or Islamophobia within the Black community that erases us, like, I mean, in the show, like, you saw the uncle, he was like hot salami and bacon, and they kind of make fun of it, like we're the cousins or the sibling in the family, like that's my Muslim sibling, and they don't take our work seriously, even though like the criminal justice system overlaps with the national security system in a way that's and now the immigration system, and it impacts like marriages and families, where families are being torn apart because there's a lot of intermarriage between like Africans and African, like in Caribbean immigrants and African immigrants, and so our families are being torn apart because of the immigration system, and but the amount of prisoners who are Muslim who are impacted by deep injustice, and I think that for us, like as Muslims, as we talk about these justice issues, we have to center those who are doing the work, who are most impacted, right? Like and lifting up their leadership, like you have like Yusuf Salam, who is part of the Exonerated Five, like why don't we hear more from him? Like he has a really strong vision.
And on top of that is I sat next to him at a man's last it's a dinner fundraiser in December, and I got a chance to talk with him, but also to listen to him because he was one of our guest speakers. So articulate, but the pain is etched. The painful injustice is just etched. But the power of his language, and that's the last thing I want to talk to you about. Well, no, it's not the last thing. One of the things is you have an anti-racism guide for white Muslims.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
Tell me about it. And it's written by a white Muslim, which
They
is powerful.
Yeah. I mean, and it was really, like there were a lot of comments around, like just that there was a lot of like not understanding racial justice issues and fragility happening. And so our, our white members came, they said, we'll write it. Similarly, we have South Asian organizers who are writing the South Asian guide, the anti-racism
I
guide. And
love
so
it.
we'll have the Arabs write their guide. And I hope, like us Black folks, we'll write our own stuff we need to deal with.
Yeah.
So this, and now with this increased interest, we're hoping for like a deeper commitment to the discussions, but also to the action. Like we got to move people into building institutions, building, like we can't just talk. We have to do, we have to work on projects. We have to embody anti-racism. We have to like support people. We have to support transformation in our communities. So, I'm really excited about like as an education organization, and we do like project-based learning, but us doing the work, right? And I think that this is a transformative moment. We haven't seen anything like this, the 50s and 60s, like, the 60s where this was all, and we benefit from all of those that lost their lives, those who faced trauma, the political prisoners that still are, there's still political prisoners from that time. So we benefit from them. And, and as I'm getting older, I'm thinking about how can I make sure, because I had to look at my generation and say, what did we build? And I hope that MuslimARC could be a testament to my generation, that we built something to pass on so that the next generation of leaders can take that baton and carry on the freedom struggle.
I love it. And the last thing I want to talk about before I rope you into coming back on this show is the power of language. And it's what to say and what not to say. I read a thing where you all had engaged, I think this was uh, something about dying when you have a loved one who's dying and people really don't know what to say. So MuslimARC moved in and said, well, we can expand that to racism.
Mm-hmm.
So talk about that if you can remember the pieces just a little bit.
So a little bit about the silk ring theory. So during this time, which is about like dealing with trauma. So when you have somebody that's facing cancer or some type of deep psychological trauma, this is not the time for you to pour your stuff, your insecurities in. You go and support them, and you go outside of somebody that's a little bit less impacted by that, and you work on your own issues, your own need to be affirmed, your own sense of needing to be comforted. So say for instance, like this is not the time to go to the people who are traumatized, to Black people, and seek for them to affirm that you're not a racist person. Like they may be hurt and everything. Go, get a coach, get a life coach, get a psychologist, talk to your friends to get support. But, right now, like we're working through some really heavy stuff with COVID. So many people, and I understand like people do have COVID, but the Black loss during COVID has been really impactful. 41% of Black businesses are shut down. We're seeing like, the impact of this will be felt for a long time. And then the police brutality, many of us have faced that or lost family members. So with not to say is learning how to be, like to be sensitive and to center those who are facing trauma, and to find a support network for you to get that, so whether you do to your affinity group, if you're South Asian or Arab, like kind of trying to make a Black person smile so you feel like you're having a good day. This, try not to do that, and maybe their language around, racial justice or even solidarity may not be solid right now because of where we're at. But, have some patience with us as we work through this trauma. So the silk ring theory is really great it's a great life skill because everybody's going to go through something someday of allyship, of centering those who are impacted and being compassionate with yourself by getting the support and resources you need to feel affirmed and good about your work.
Okay, well, this has been the fastest 50 minutes. And I hope you're still smiling when I ring you again and say, Marguerite, where are we now in July? What are we going to do for the fall? Okay.
Yeah.
This is Professor Amina Al-Din with Critical Talk, speaking with Marguerite Hill. An exciting conversation. I am so tickled. This has made my Juma. I
Like,
am going to be my Juma on Juneteenth with Marguerite Hill. Thank you so much. Jazakallah.
why?
Salam.
Walaikum salam.